play with you anymore.
Episode 6 of Alien Earth. Let's talk about it. Hey, great to have you here. So today we'll be discussing the 6th episode of Alien Earth. As a quick reminder, if you enjoy hanging out and talking Alien, please consider subscribing to the channel for more future content. So we open up the episode back with the Earth story with our characters from Prodigy, and I didn't expect to be one of the people bummed to return to Earth after the chaos on the Maginot, but it turns out I am. But I mostly think it's because they surprisingly started this episode off so slow. We have Wendy, who's continuing to talk to this rapidly growing but still baby xenomorph that's now inside this glass room. Meanwhile, Joe and Kirsh are nearby watching her, and Joe begins the endless amount of times this episode he blatantly brings up leaving with Wendy. He did it earlier this season with Ains, and will just not let up no matter how many times he's told no. And speaking of Ains, our next scene is actually with him, and both Dame and Arthur Sylvia, as they're discussing the problems with Nibs being this traumatic hybrid, with emotional reactions like how she most recently snapped at Dame about supposedly being pregnant. And Ains decides, screw it, let's just wipe her mind, give her a full reset. However, the Sylvias question this decision, and Arthur in particular continues to challenge it until Ains is like, hey Sylvia, do you know how to do this? Great, you're fired, Arthur. And Ains even tells Arthur if he doesn't leave the island by the end of the day, he's gonna be shot. And I have no idea how this makes any sense. Aren't the Sylvias married? So he just kind of divorced them? Separately, we then have Joe, once again, can you guess? Yep, bring up leaving the island, this time to Wendy. Surprisingly to Joe though, she wants to stay and keep talking to this new xenomorph. And so far this episode, I completely hate Joe's character. And at this point, I don't think I would mind a facehugger taking him out, but we'll get there. We then shift over off the island where Boy Kavalier is meeting with Yutani, with this moderator assigned by the 5 corporations to discuss Yutani's belongings being in Prodigy territory. They bicker back and forth for a little bit, and eventually Kavalier implies that these species were attempting to be smuggled back on Earth by Yutani, and this violates roughly 50 corporate laws. Yutani steps in here and says that these creatures are actually meant for another planet, but the mediator here starts to really side with Kavalier. In the final outcome of the meeting, they wind up settling on $20 billion to give Yutani back her belongings, but Kavalier tells her it's going to take until quarantine is over, which she is not happy about. And I was a little surprised that things went so poorly for Yutani during this mediation, considering that Morrow is standing right there behind her, and just last episode, we saw that he watched Boy Kavalier be responsible for the crash alongside a passenger who wound up going rogue. We then get probably my favorite scene of the episode, with perhaps my 2 favorite characters in Morrow and Kirsh going down this elevator together at the same time, and they just really jab at each other about their personal form of technology, the synth and cyborg, which one's ultimately better. It definitely feels like these 2 characters are the real standouts of this season. And then now back with Prodigy, Dame Sylvia does move forward with wiping Nibs' trauma from her memory. So it seems like Nibs is not going to remember anything about visiting the Maginot crash site. And I'm still kind of wondering here, does Dame not care about Arthur at all? And then this next scene makes absolutely no sense. Nibs suddenly wakes up to Wendy at her side, and Wendy then brings up all the things that Nibs just had erased from her mind. So nobody was watching Nibs as she woke up and made sure that the other hybrids didn't interfere with her. I know Kavalier is a pretty arrogant leader, but these people at this company are dumb. We then get a weird montage of our characters as Joe reads about Peter Pan, and at this moment I'm thinking, geez, this is where they chose to take things, coming off that awesome spaceship episode. And then we show Slightly, after briefly talking with Smee, he heads over to Joe's quarters to use him as a facehugger human sacrifice. But I just know at this moment, Joe's gonna have some kind of plot armor here. Sure enough, one of Joe's soldier friends comes in and takes him away, saying he needs Joe per security's orders. Joe follows him out, and they're joined by another colleague as they walk through the rain in these ponchos just talking. And once again, Joe brings up trying to leave the island. And even the girl that's with him there, who literally just complained about their work, even she's like, nah, this is a good gig, don't screw this up for me. We do then briefly see Wendy talking to the xenomorph more, and it's already grown to be like a teenager size, so this dude is growing up fast, since I'm pretty sure this whole episode takes place within a day. We then get the primary inciting event for this episode during a conversation between Kirsh and his new protege hybrid, Toodles. Kirsh is still flying back with Kavalier from their meeting, and he calls Toodles to help take care of the creatures in the lab. Kirsh asks if Curly is there to help him, but Toodles wants all the success for himself, so he says nope, and then tells Curly that Kirsh needs him in the lab, and he's going to take care of it all on his own. And he wants to take the credit, but he's going to be wishing he brought a teammate. And while I would largely criticize how these characters are in this episode, I will admit they're mostly sticking to their given archetypes. For example, we have Toodles wanting to impress Kirsh, or Smee continuing to be the childlike jokester. So Toodles heads to the lab to feed the creatures, and when he goes to put food in the room with this hive, the food slot door comes off as he pulls it, so he scrambles a little bit and decides, screw it, I'll just open the main door and set the food inside the cage there. But as he does so, our friend T. Ocellus, that eyeball creature that's in the sheep, rams its head against the door, startling Toodles and leading to him moving his foot that was keeping the door held open. So this little eye dude continues to be a terrorizer. So now we have Toodles locked in this room with this hive, and we know this episode was called The Fly, so it seems like he's toast at this point. The fly then comes out of the hive, lands on his arm, and just sprays acid all in his face like a Dilophosaurus, instantly killing him. We do get some pretty gnarly visuals of two of the flies eating his face. Meanwhile, the sheep who instigated this just goes on over and eats his food, as if he's like, my work is done here. It was similar to what happened in the last episode on the Maginot when the eyeball monster helped out that tick creature when he distracted the lab crew member. We then get a scene of Dame, who's now being confronted by Wendy, and Wendy is really mad here that Nibs didn't get a choice in the matter of wiping her own mind. Wendy also defends the specimens here, saying that they shouldn't be experiments, which continues to build up towards this eventual rebellion that we're probably going to get. Wendy is realizing that her, the rest of the hybrids, and these creatures are all just projects for Kavalier, and she even in this moment rejects her name of Wendy in favor of her childhood name of Marcy. And as she's walking away, she talks about Kirsh telling her the difference between humans and machines, and gives the line, I don't want to be people anymore if this is what people are, killing things, taking them apart just to see what's inside, which is pretty true. Dame ultimately tries to pitch herself as a helper, saying that this is new technology and they have to work together. Wendy rejects her though, and it seems that Dame may be going down with the sinking ship of Prodigy. Joe then stumbles into Arthur's office, and Arthur tells him about him being fired as he's packing his things up, and Joe asks him if his sister is safe here, because as we know, he wants to take her and leave the island. And at this point, Arthur has nothing to lose anymore, so while he plays it cool for the cameras, he types out on the computer telling Joe to take Wendy and get out of there, and gives him a boat code 102770, which I guess Joe's just going to remember that. Arthur then also turns off all the tracking for these hybrids, so they're now pretty much going to be free to roam no matter what. But as he's doing this, he notices that Toodles is coming up with an error as not being connected, and that he was last known to be in the lab. And definitely kind of strange here that nobody else is observing Toodles or the lab at this giant corporation. Like, didn't Ains tell Slightly earlier this season about all of these hybrids being watched 24/7 through their eyes? I guess we just chalk it up to everyone in this episode being totally careless. And at the same time, Slightly is still torn on getting a human for Morrow. He's really struggling with this until we see Arthur come down the hallway, and it's clear at this point he's now the intended sacrifice. And Arthur super foolishly goes into the lab that is meant for synths and hybrids only to find Toodles. Maybe the point is that Arthur is super invested in these characters as people, but it feels like he's absolutely the stupidest character in this entire episode, which does feel like it's a little bit conflicting. For his background being the scientist in this lab, I would expect him to be pretty smart and aware of things. And we also separately have Kirsh watching all of this while on his plane back to the island, but he's not telling anybody, not even Kavalier, so he definitely wants chaos at this point, and maybe he's working for one of the other corporations. But we have Arthur going to that cage where Toodles is, who's clearly dead at this point, so I don't know what he's really trying to do here. Slightly is behind him, opening up some of the other sealed off creature rooms, and Arthur just doesn't notice anything. He then tries to drag Toodles' body out of there until he notices finally that the door for the eggs is open, and when he tries to leave, Slightly's outside the door and doesn't let him out. I guess Arthur's access may no longer work. Slightly says he has a family and can't open the door for that reason, to which Arthur replies with he also has a family. But that doesn't work on Slightly. Arthur then runs over to the phone and sure enough gets rolled up on by a face hugger. Slightly then goes back into the lab and takes Arthur's body out through one of the side vents in the room. So this lab's containment has now been breached, and the walls are really starting to cave in on Prodigy at this point, but I don't think most of our characters actually care about that. They feel like they're part of the rebellion for the most part. And in what's come to be Alien Earth fashion, we zoom in on the instigator, our buddy Ocellus, as we cut to black with Godsmack playing for the outro credits. So what band do you think we'll get next week? Will it be someone like Korn or Drowning Pool or Perfect Circle? Major kudos if you pick correctly in the comments.
I'll get down with the sickness.
And looking at an overall score here, on a scale of negative, neutral, or positive for this episode, episode 6 pretty clearly for me gets a negative rating. The episode was filled with a ton of inconsistent writing choices. For example, Nibs being this liability, but them then deciding to leave her alone with Wendy. The Arthur firing also made no sense with Dame still being there. I'm also not sure why Morrow didn't mention the Kavalier scandal during that legal hearing. Maybe that data was lost, or Morrow just really wants to do things his way, and then the people in charge supposedly seeing the vision of every hybrid, but Toodles just dies with nobody caring. I know he's a synth, but I thought somebody would have noticed. Kirsh acting pretty suspicious this episode. Then we have Arthur, who goes into the lab that's not meant for humans, opens up the cage door despite Toodles already being dead. They turned his character pretty dumb in this episode. Toodles also didn't make the smartest moves here, but it's okay for his character since he was a kid. But his hubris definitely caught up with him when deciding to handle the lab on his own and not include Curly. And just a small nitpick with this one, but somehow the facehugger went straight for Arthur, but the fly stayed put until the end. I guess maybe the fly doesn't want any kind of conflict and just easy leftover scraps. And then on top of all of those unrealistic decisions that were made throughout this episode that I just covered, the dialogue in this episode was really bad. I hadn't noticed it previously, but the conversations here just didn't seem authentic, even the ones with human characters. Then you have Joe, who quickly became my least favorite character in the show this episode, who's asking anybody who will talk to him about trying to leave the island with Wendy. He's previously asked Ains, here he asks Kirsh, Wendy, his two soldier colleagues, kind of Arthur as well. It doesn't feel like he talked about anything else. And he has absolutely no discretion based on who he's talking to. Overall, it was just a poor transition, coming fresh off of what fans viewed as an epic episode on the Maginot. I actually had been enjoying the Earth and hybrid stuff, but earlier this season, I heard people complaining about that storyline, so I can't imagine what audiences are going to say after this one. I kind of hinted at this in my opening, but Noah Hawley, the show's creator, mentioned this in one of his earlier episode podcasts. The fans already know the xenomorph. We don't know these other creatures, so he wanted to give us that feeling of experiencing the xenomorph for the first time with these other species. And with that as his goal, I would say that part is working. I'm much more interested in the Ocellus, Plumacare, even these flies more than I am for the actual alien. But let me know, do you feel the same way? And what do you think of this episode? Was it as much of a dud for you as it was for me? And with only 2 episodes left, I'm thinking we'll get a big creature breakout next episode, and Prodigy's gonna start to fall thanks to the hybrids, Morrow, Kirsh, the aliens, pretty much everybody except for Kavalier, Ains, and maybe Dame Sylvia. But let me know your thoughts on all things Alien Earth down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.